how far we've gone, whether we have a consensus on the kind of actions that we need to take, what are the priorities that we need to address, and what are the key, what is the way ahead for us, and what are the messages that we're carrying home? What's really struck home to us during these 2 days? When we started off on this conference, we had an ambitious agenda for ourselves. We wanted to achieve a shared understanding of the challenges and opportunities for economic growth, equity, and fiscal sustainability arising from the demographic transition in our region. We wanted to have a greater appreciation by governments of the critical adaptations needed in public policy, structures, and services to respond to population aging, and fresh perspectives within civil society and international actors on how to shape policy advocacy and programs. Now, against this very an ambitious agenda that we set for ourselves, the meeting was beautifully structured along the 3 key pillars as we could identify it. The 3 key pillars that I could see is, firstly, we had a pillar that looked at how population aging was going to affect economic growth, or even impact it positively or negatively, equity and fiscal sustainability, which was one pillar, which was a broad issue. Second was, how was population aging going to affect the demand for certain services, social protection services, whether it be income security, health services, long-term care, and how are we going to adapt? And the third was the pillar on how could older persons be more productive? How can they be used more as a resource? How could an enabling environment be provided for them in order to improve, in order to enhance the contribution towards making a better world? I think the first ambition that we set for ourselves, and yesterday Mr. Myra asked this question, what was the thread that went through? And I think we've already achieved that. First, we need to acknowledge that this discussion shouldn't be as a discussion of a burden or an impending doom. I think we are here because we have been successful. We wanted to reduce fertility rates so that promote gender equality and promote participation of women. We also wanted to increase life expectancy, which is a natural. And yet, when we are successful, why are we so surprised? We got to adapt. The question, therefore, is to give it a positive. I think that is something this conference has already done. And that's one very big message, that we're here because we are successful, and don't let us desist from using words like tsunami and doom and burden and load. It's about adapting. It's about restructuring ourselves to kind of position ourselves better to address this new way in which societies are going to function. So I've got 3 distinguished panelists with me who are going to share their thoughts with us about what they thought were the key messages under each one of these pillars. They need no introduction, but just Sang-Hyop, who's an authority, as you know, on the issue of national transfer accounts. He's with the East-West Center in Hawaii. He's to my extreme right. I've got Tengku Aizan on my right, who's the founder, director of the Malaysia Institute on Aging. And to my left, John Beard, the director of Aging and Life Course in World Health Organization. So Sang-Hyop, without much delay, in 5 minutes, if you could provide us an overview. I'm not going to hold you too much to 5 minutes, but we want to hear as many people as possible as to what you think. What really struck out? What are the key priority actions?
5 minutes, right? We are trying to solve the world problems in 2 days.
We do.
Actually, let me talk about those 3 things. One is we need some evidence-based policy implementation. That's the most important thing. Actually, we found that yesterday we actually talked about a lot about the research, but there is little research in Asia. So there are many reasons actually. One is people actually say data, but data is very different from information, because data is just like numbers, but we actually try to, we make this data to turn into actually useful information. So, but that actually task has not been done. The devils are actually in details. So many people actually mentioned that, we need more desegregation. we just, how about this, support system by gender, by income level, by rural and urban, but that has not been done. So that's actually a big gap in the data set, the information. And actually the people found that actually, in our country, actually, this data is not available. Why? Because of data quality. So this actually drives another, kind of dimension, which is capacity building. This capacity building is not just about human capital. It's about the data quality, improvement in data, and also improvement in human capital. Second part is it's like a policy. Actually, we found that countries are very different. But actually, when they ask this question, what is the best policy, optimal policy for our country? My answer is, I don't know. I don't know, because the countries are all different. So if we actually provide some information about the country's economy and the systems, then actually that provides some more answers. So if you give me like some policy options, then actually working with your own country, actually, researchers, then actually we can shed some light on the policy, but that actually has a lot of implication for growth, equity, and sustainability. But there is no actually panacea. There is no one policy which satisfies all these criteria. For example, let me talk about the female labor force participation. Everybody talk about female labor force participation, right? Let's increase female labor force participation or productivity. But let's think this way. Is it a policy for population aging? Suppose there is a country which does not experience any population aging, like 100 years ago. It's still good policy, isn't it? Increasing productivity. Increasing female labor force participation is always a good policy, regardless of population aging. Okay, have you actually thought this way? Then we can say this way, actually, increasing female labor force participation and increasing productivity probably has more positive impact if the country is going through population aging. So that's actually two different sentences. This is a policy we talk about all the time, right? But when we say, this is evidence, and our actually research shows that this increase in female labor force participation or productivity has a bigger impact, has a positive impact, then actually that's totally different policy implication. There are so many here. How does and what does the future hold? That's actually a very interesting question. It's a very, very long question, actually. Okay, there are only 4 support systems which support the elderly, their consumption need. One is labor income, right? The other is asset. The other is family support system or public transfers. How about labor income? Can you actually increase the labor income? To a certain extent, but according to our previous research, there is some limitation, and it depends on country. It depends on country. In some countries, the elderly's productivity is so low, so increasing labor force participation doesn't actually increase the labor income that much. But in some countries, the productivity is very high, then actually it has a big impact. So in that case, the policy implication is not just increasing labor force participation. In this case, you should say, probably increase in productivity of elderly or productivity of everybody is the probably precondition. How about the family transfers? It's deteriorating in every country. So that's actually a problem. Then how about public transfers? It's inevitable. It's inevitable. However, rely on too much public transfers may be a problem, especially in terms of sustainability. And how about asset-based reallocation? When we say asset, people say, it's a saving. It's not just about saving, it's a capital. It's a physical capital and human capital. So actually rely on asset-based reallocation has some positive policy implications. Well, the last thing actually is 5 minutes already. So last thing I want to say is that I really liked actually what Philly O'Keefe actually said yesterday. There are behavioral change and compositional change. And the future has not been made, actually. So we don't have to be too much pessimistic, too much optimistic about this, but actually the future will be made by our policies. I conclude my remarks.
Thank you very much, Sang-Hyop. And I think your last sentence tells us the future is to be made provided we act now. So I think one of the key messages, in addition to what I could gather just, is this is the right time to act. I think the cost of inaction is going to be big. So I think while there's still time to act, this is the time to act. I think that's something earlier rather than later. Tengku, Aizan, may I come to you? You've been following the pillar on increasing productivity of older persons. How do you really make them use their resources, which they have in such great abundance, to a greater extent to kind of shape economic growth and kind of enhance the quality of our societies? So, Tengku.
Thank you. I think what I want to share with you is about enhancing the enabling environment that would create society for all ages. Because if you look at that way, then you have to put in place a flexible situation where you have to put flexible workplace practices in the following aspect. Because if you look at the workplace flexibility, is where you work. You can work at home, you can work in the office, but in our culture, you have to clock into the office. If you don't clock in, that means you're not in the office. But actually, you can work anywhere. But the issue is the systems that you have to put in place to govern for the feasibility of doing that. So that is one issue that we have to look at. Because it doesn't mean that face value that you are working. Because if you come to the office and you don't do anything, you are in office, you're not productive. So that is one thing that we have to think about. Another aspect is about the workday. Because older person and many of us also do not want to have the 9-to-5 job. They want a flexible hours so that they can even share jobs and things like that. So we need to be thinking about this now, especially in our region. And the other aspect is about career flexibility, where we can switch. But what's happening in our area is that our Employment Act is very rigid. So we can't really perform that unless we review our Employment Act, and also about the negotiation power of the workers and the employer. And another aspect is that the employer must be agreeable to these new changes, because we have to look at this in the perspective of the new age. Because we can no longer have the vision of the older person as rocking chair in the veranda. And many of us do not have that veranda and rocking chair anymore. So the new views of aging is very critical. And to me, it is also about the willingness of the political power to look into this new issue. Because I know in the West, they did it 20 years before the aging issues comes into place. But we in this part of the region, we will be an aged nation maybe in 4 or 5 years' time. And we have one for Malaysia, it's just within 15 years. So what do we do then within this short time? That we need to grapple with the different strategies that we need to develop. So that will be thing that we need to act now, as Srinivas said. Now is the time. Yeah, to look at this, because there's a lot to learn. And the issue with us also is that our part of the world, we don't have the historical track of learning, of adjusting to this new phenomena. So that is one. And another issue is about decentralizing the government and the employers, so that we can resolve ageism, because that is the main attitude. The ageism is not just the employer perspective, but it's also the older person themselves, because sometimes some of them feel old before they are old, and that will affect productivity, that will affect all this kind of social institution. Because to me, when you are not ready for old age, then you have all the excuses not to do and not to be productive. In that sense, because you are thinking, 2 years, I'm going to retire, so I don't have to do anything. Somebody else will take over. That's not the way to do it, because there is a gap in terms of employability within our society because of the economic crisis in the early 80s, that we have in Malaysia at least about 15 years difference in seniority in terms of the new people taking over the post, which are not really quote unquote mature yet and not ready to hold a position of power and things like that. So the toxic knowledge that is held by the senior workers needs to be transferred. So to me, the issue of multi-generational workforce has to come into play in this kind of situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tengku. I think you covered a host of issues and raised the fact that older persons themselves sometimes, unconsciously project ageism against themselves. An example given in a country presentation where women had a lower retirement age compared to men, and when they wanted to revise it, the main opponents of the revision of the retirement age were women because they felt they wanted to retire earlier, with practical reasons maybe. But at times this can happen. John, can I turn to you with you've extensively come out with a report recently on aging, population aging and health. And so you looked at the issue of health and long-term care, and you also related it to how much it's going to cost and the fact that how much of it is actually an investment. So John, go ahead. Yes.
So yes, we started the day by asking the question, is expenditure on health a cost or an investment? And I think there was an overwhelming sense that it's an investment. But the question is, an investment in what? And I think it's more than just economic growth. I think it's in socio-economic development, in sustainable development. And I think if you see it in that sense and you think about how it acts as an enabler to some of the changes we've just been talking about, it makes a lot more sense. I think that unanimity reflected what I also sensed across the conference was a really genuine growing interest in the region in tackling this issue. I know a lot of you have been involved in this area for longer than I have, but even in my time, I've seen a big shift that people used to give it lip service, but now they really want to know the answers. And they say, okay, this might be an investment, but what are the concrete investments that have the biggest return? Where is the dividend going to be? How do I get the balance between those dividends? And what are the priorities that we should have? Unfortunately, you're looking for recommendations, and I don't think we got anywhere near that, and I don't think that's possible. I think that's unrealistic at this stage. But what we heard about is a lot of examples from different parts of the region. And we also heard, I think, a need for innovative models which shift from trying to meet the needs of doctors to trying to meet the needs of older people. And in doing that, we need to think differently than we have in the past in terms of how systems have been developed, where we had acute care services, particularly a focus on hospitals. We need to go back into the community, and now we need to be thinking about providing chronic care in that setting as close as we can to people's homes. And I think we heard some interesting examples. We also heard, I think, that the experience that's happened in Rich World does seem to be being duplicated in this region. And so there are things we can learn, and in particular, the design of the system that you have will be important in terms of the costs that you face. So I think that was very interesting. I heard two themes repeatedly that I think are worth reinforcing. The first is the question of the private sector and the issue of public-private partnerships, and the need to involve the private sector, but also the need to make sure that that's in a way that best meets the needs of the older person and not the needs of the provider. And I think that's a delicate balance, and I don't think it's one that anywhere has quite got right. And I think a lot of people express concerns that we need to be thinking in a much more nuanced way than just a market economy. So it's not either the public sector or a market economy. There can be, in a public-private partnership, a very clear role for government in terms of setting the boundaries and setting the rules of engagement, as it were. The second issue which repeatedly came up is the issue of long-term care. And again, this is something I don't think I've heard talked about as much as it has been the last couple of years, and it's about time. because you can't talk about healthcare without thinking about how you provide social care and how you provide broader types of care that are completely out of the health system. I think, again, there was a general agreement that we need to develop systems that are relevant to the cultural context of each country. And also that are relevant to the needs of the individual. Some individuals may live alone, some individuals may live in more supportive communities. The context that they live in is very important. And so I think what repeatedly came up was, and we heard stories from different places such as Thailand and Singapore about how they're trying to develop systems that actually can meet the needs of older people, but which are specific to their local context. And again, I don't think there's firm recommendations. As I think I said in my talk, there is no recipe that we can give a country, this is what you have to put in place. This is something we have to develop. But I think the really heartening thing I heard from the conference is there does seem to be a really genuine momentum in the region for achieving that. So I think this is actually almost a milestone conference. I think it's fantastic that HelpAge has put this whole question on the agenda and really made us think about what the investments might be, but also to stimulate people to realise that we have to come up with some new ones. And I would go a step further than what I think. Unfortunately, I missed Pip's talk yesterday, but if I get it right, you're saying it's the decisions we now will shape the future. Yes, that's true, but I would put it this way. I think the decisions we make now will shape the future. But the decisions will shape the future that enables older people to invent futures that none of us can imagine. It's not for us to invent their futures, but it's for us to enable that to happen.
Thank you. That's, I think you've been very kind of far-reaching in the way that you've addressed this. But I do want to pick up on one point that about the fact about universal health care. I mean, it's part of the SDGs. And I think there was some agreement that if there was one step that could really address the needs of older persons in the region, especially those living in the middle and low-income countries, it would be a step towards provision of universal health care. But I get it that also has to be construed in the context of different countries and the situations. Yes, please.
I'll just respond briefly because one of the problems we confront, I agree totally, but I think first of all, universal health coverage needs to expand to include long-term care. We can't think of the two as completely separate. They could be in different systems, but there needs to be an integration and a coordination between them, and you can't have one without the other. That's number one. Number two is often in this region and in others, people mistake universal access to health insurance as universal health coverage. It's not. It's just a financing mechanism. Countries also need to be thinking about the systems they're putting in place, how they're ensuring that there is this integration, and how they're ensuring that those systems meet the need of older people.
Thank you very much, John. I think we agree on that. And now I'm going to reach out to the audience. The reason that we gave kind of little time in the initial presentation of the panelists is to really get as much ideas as we can from the audience. Please make it very clear to 2 minutes so that we cover as many as possible. The gentleman there first.
I think what we missed the entire conference, that human beings are not robots. They have other needs than economic needs, market needs. They are families. Their children have gone away. They need other needs to be satisfied. We always look on statistics, we always look on economics, on markets, on facilities, but we do not look at the human being within his soul, within his heart, within his feeling. So I think as HelpAge, we have to look at the human being as the whole person and not limited only to economics. There are people who are socially poor and there are other people who are economically poor. We are only talking about economically poor and we are not talking about socially poor. And to the narrative of Dr. Maya, he said yesterday about his mother who's 95 years old. She lives a Gandhian life. People try to get to, Gandhi said, rich is he who has fewer wishes. So what people want is connection to their families, to their neighborhood, They want to die dignified death as human beings, and we are trying to make only figures, statistics out of them, and that is a very wrong step if we do not look at just right at this time that human beings are ultimately more than statistics.
Absolutely correct, and it's just that the focus of this conference, there are different conferences which have different focuses. It is not to downplay the issues that you highlight. It is just to have different focuses, and I think you're very right that when we look at the bigger picture, what you mentioned is absolutely central. But I don't think the focus is simply because this is kind of one of the emerging issues, and so I'm sure this aspect will be center stage in the next conference or even in the way we address some of these issues. So absolutely, point well taken. So lady in the middle.
Thank you very much, and I would like to thank the panelists for a very quality discussion. And you have raised a very vital question, that is, now this is time to take action. And I would like to ask you, how we're gonna make accountable our government, our policymakers, to take action on aging issues, especially to mainstream aging issues in the policy, planning and budget allocation. Because since Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, we know that 159 countries, they are the signatory. But how many countries have policy on aging? How many countries have action plan? How many countries has separate ministry for aging? But we need all these things. This is time. So I think we will find a way, and because the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging is a soft law, and there is no such accountability or a mandatory condition for reporting to the governments, to UN or anywhere. So now governments, I think many parliamentarians are here, and I think we need one plenary, and we need one commitment from them that they will do something. If they have the policy, then we need action plan. We need separate ministry. We need allocation in the budget, in the policies, in the planning process, and separate interministerial committee also we need, so to mainstream aging issues in our economy. Thank you very much.
Yes, Mr. Zaidi.
I think I just want to reiterate the point made by the first panelist, that how important it is to have good quality data on lives of older people. This is sort of stating the obvious, but I think it needs to be stated again, that it's the survey data on which we rely. It is from that point onward that we develop indicators and indices. All of that is reliant on good survey data. And for that reason, from the work that we have done so far, over and over again, we come to the conclusion that we need specialized surveys for older people. Something of the type that the Health Retirement Survey in the US has initiated, something that WHO SAGE surveys have initiated. So we need more of those kinds of surveys to be able to, one, capture better the needs and aspirations of older people. Two, in our enumeration process, we should be able to better understand how to collect information from older people, because that's often not possible in the surveys which are meant to cover all the age groups. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just come back to the panel quickly, starting with John and then Sang-Hyop.
Okay, I just wanted to comment because I think these are interesting points. How do we stimulate action? I think the first is we need to combat ageism. We need to change the way people think about what it is to be old. And I'm sure your stream had more discussion on that. I think the second is policymakers are not very imaginative people. We need to give them some demonstrations where they can see things in a different way and think, oh, yes, I can do that. And then the third one touches on Asghar's point, which is I think we have to hold people accountable. It's more than just doing surveys. one of the things we plan is that by 2020, when we hope there will be a decade of healthy aging starting, that we have the baseline for an accountability process, so that we've proposed to the G7, in fact, we hear back next week, the idea of a global survey which collects a lot of the things that Askar is saying, but not just about health status, also about how well positioned each country is to actually deliver to meet the needs of those older people. And I think that's more than just doing surveys. I think accountability and keeping countries open to scrutiny and comparison is actually a way to stimulate them to want to do better. So I would think there were 3 key steps.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Okay. Actually, we have heard about this one a lot. Take action now. I mean, 5 years ago, we said take action now. But so what is important is, I think, really kind of it's a slow, but the change. I actually see the change for the last 2 days. Let me actually give you an example. The Myanmar representative from Myanmar and Sri Lanka actually approached me, and actually I learned a lot. And this data, I mean, so-called National Transfer Accounts, is really useful. But Myanmar and Sri Lanka are not doing that. Actually, how can we join your team? Actually, Myanmar and Sri Lanka are 2 countries who are not constructing this one. I was really happy. So what I said, actually, okay, you have to approach, like research institute or university, and there are people, identify people, and you can do it. Actually, you can just contact me. So it's very positive, actually. But there are some hurdles. The hurdle is data quality. Not every country has a good data set, actually. But I actually see the bright side. The bright side is that actually during this process, capacity building, we find that, the first policy implication is you need a good data. You need to have a good statistics, actually. That's also policy implication. We didn't know whether the country actually has a national income and product account. We didn't know whether the country has a good quality of microdata. So that's actually first policy implication. I think, okay, so let's begin with that one. Then actually we build. It has been 14 years, so we can continue. So taking action means actually it's not just making, of course, making this whole agenda, long-term plan is important, but this is already taking action. They approached me, and they actually start to want to build something. I think that's very important, actually, progress. And also, Thailand has been using all this kind of output, actually, and implement policy based on these evidences for their future planning. I think that's really amazing, actually. That's actually happening these days.
Yeah, I think what I would like to add is that we need a champion, and it doesn't have to be a government, but it's just one person can be a champion. I take myself for example, because I was thinking about with the data I have, I know that the older person do not make use of their time. They have lots of time in their hands and things like that. So I started the University of the Third Age in 2007, and it has been going on and becomes an NGO. And now in the 11th Malaysia Plan, the University of the Third Age is in the development plan for it to be replicated all over Malaysia. So it's just that we did it and we showed data to the government that this is working and this can be replicated. So to me, we just can start small and it just evolved and grow, and because it's very difficult to convince government if you don't have data. But if you start small and you keep documenting what you do and say to the government, this is the amount of money I spend in this project, and this is the reach that I have. And then besides the reach, we also talk about the social return of investment, because they always talk to you about, I give you this money, what is the ROI? And things like that. So to me, you need to have a champion that believe in our work, we believe in our work, and then we can go from there. Because you have to start somewhere, and you can't wait for government. Government is quite slow in that sense.
Yeah, I agree. And Sang-Hyop, I take your point that data is very important, but for a lot of actions that need to be taken, I think there's enough evidence already on the ground. I think that's true. So we start our second round. Mr. Myra, your question, please. There.
Thank you. Yes, to this point about action, we have said 5 years ago we must take action. And there are many other issues on which climate change will keep saying, let's take action. So there are, I'm going to call them problems, in which collective action is required. And the result will only come when there is more collective action. So the solution to those problems is a process of collective action. But we have this bias that unless you tell me in very concrete terms with data what is the solution, there is no solution. And I'm suggesting, like you're suggesting probably, that actually those solutions will emerge and be implemented also if we start a process of collective action. So the process is the solution, and the action lies in creating the process.
I agree that we can't work out answers right from the beginning and have a perfect solution before we start. But just that. Yes, Mr. Long.
Hello, Long from National Economic University, Vietnam. Actually, I also share the point with us about using the data for policy advocacy. Actually, so far now, we have so many kind of data in Vietnam, for instance. But why we have do a lot of policy advocacy activity to the government, but why the policy change not really adaptive with what aging situation in Vietnam happened? Because I think that maybe to some extent we explain the situation, but not really deep enough so that the government think that is the urgent problem. For instance, yesterday, when we talk about the poverty reduction for older people, right? Everyone see the the line just going down, and everyone happy because the poverty rate is going down. It's true because every country we have economic growth, so poverty rate is down. But the problem is the people remain the poverty. They are having higher poverty gap. It means they are living lower and lower in compared with the poverty line. So it means the poverty situation is more, worse than before, right? So what I mean here is that whenever we talk about the poverty situation, for instance, we need to dig further and further so that the government understand well about the situation. Also today, when we talk about the health expenditure per capita for older people, right? We can see many people at 60 and over, higher and higher compared with young people. But the problem is we need to dig further, for my opinion, right? Because older people usually they are facing a lot of problem with health, with different disease, non-communicable disease. They use a lot of health services, right? Frequency of use higher than young people, for instance, right? And that is why the per capita expenditure is higher. But we need to dig further in the way what kind of costs that they use. So for instance, in the case of Vietnam, when we compare older people, 60 and over compared with young people less than 60, it shows that for outpatient costs they are quite the same. For drug, for technical service, but for inpatient, the older people have consumed about twice of drug costs compared to young people, right? So from that one, we can see different map of policy to advocate to the government. So again, what I mean here is data is there, right? How to use that one, right? As much as possible, and also convincing the government, to change the system. That is important. Right. Another problem is now everyone say aging population will make the pension fund, broken. It means we look older people as like very gray image, but it's not. I do agree with Eduardo yesterday. He said that adaptation is not optional. It's a must, right? So we have to redesign our social protection system along with the aging population, not we aging population going to with our social protection, right? So that is what I really want to share with you, to argue with the government, especially in developing Asia. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Erlinda from the delegation of the Philippines. And it's important to get a perspective of what she is taking away from you.
Okay. Well, after hearing all the various presentations, the Philippine delegation has identified 4 key priority actions. 1, we need to study the feasibility of universal coverage of pension for older persons. To date, we're only covering the indigent persons, age 60 and above. And then second, We also want to explore the possibility of a flexible retirement age. In the Philippines, our compulsory retirement age is 65 with an option to retire at 60. We think the right to choose when to retire should be seriously considered. And then third, we also need to strengthen partnership among government agencies, civil society organizations, the academe, the private sector, and the international organizations in promoting the welfare of the older persons. And as mentioned earlier, we need good quality data as evidence for evidence-based policy making. And then finally, we also have a Council for the Welfare of Children. We have a Philippine Commission on Women. We have a National Council on Disability Affairs. And we also have the the National Youth Commission in the Philippines. But we don't have a council for the welfare of older persons. So we are seriously considering working with our legislators to create a council for the welfare of older persons in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think they're very categorical and very clear takeaway messages that you're going from here. Very interesting point that you raise about flexible retirement age and how do we see that being implemented? How feasible is that? Is that something that you think is very important? Because rather than arbitrarily increasing the retirement age, because there are people in different sectors who may want to retire earlier. It's easy for someone like a bureaucrat to continue until 65, 70. If I'm a dock worker, would I be able to continue until that age? So I just wanted to know if there are any views on that from our panelists or from John?
I've got very strong views. We have a mandatory retirement age in the UN. It's inequitable and discriminatory. Any policy that's based on chronological age is wrong. Chronological age is not the thing that should be determining many of the policies that we're talking about. I'll also be provocative about this question of action. And I say this, HelpAge is probably our most important partner, and you do some fantastic things in parts of the world which we can't even reach. It's so important, the work you do. But historically, there's been one thing you do very badly, and I'm glad that it's been changing more recently, but I think you need to think about it more, and that is evaluation of the programs you put in place. And evaluation not to justify their existence, evaluation that can inform people like me so that I can say, listen, there's proof that this works. And I think it's a big step. It's a step that requires you beyond thinking, oh, we're about action and they're about academia. You need to bridge that divide and ensure that the things you do are really thoroughly evaluated so that we can sell them to policymakers.
Sang-Hyop.
Okay. It's a very actually interesting question because, yesterday we also heard about this one. Let's make the labor market flexible. That means actually, retirement age and everything actually should be abolished. However, there is the real world. The real world is like this. If the government actually increased the retirement age, pensionable age, then what happens is in some countries, if the labor market is not flexible, then actually the companies actually kick them out, force them to retire early. Like Samsung, you said actually 55. No, there is no person who stay until 55 in Samsung. They all retire at early 50s. So all my friends already retired from Samsung. Why? Because the labor market is not flexible. They actually pay higher wage based on seniority, based on wage system. So in that case, what happens is that if we actually increase the retirement age, then the gap between the actual labor income, when they receive, so they actually retire at 50, and the duration of the non-income, right, the non-labor income actually increases. So it's actually a special case, but it depends on countries. If we observe this one, actually, you can actually see the protest when actually Franks say that, oh, let's increase the retirement age. The elderly protest. No, we want to retire at 65. We want to enjoy our life. And in Asian countries, the young people protest, not the elderly. Why? Because, oh, they are stealing our job. So then that tells us a lot of things. Countries are different, right? So we have to actually study this one more. But absolutely, the flexible labor market is the precondition. But if the labor market is not flexible, something else happens.
I think you raise another point in this very nice retort that you made. That is the whole impression that youth have, or the perception there is that if you increase retirement age, that the older persons are going to take away jobs of younger people. We know that's not true for all sorts of reasons, but is there anyone who can really tell us about what they feel about it? How do you deal with such arguments? I have the panel here. Anyone, if you can? Yes, Mr. Zaidi.
I think the whole argument revolves around the fact that if we have longer working careers and empowerment of older people, then we have bigger GDP to share. And bigger GDP, more economic activity means jobs for everyone. So if we end up forcing people into early retirement, there will be lesser economic activity. If we empower our older workers and help them continue to contribute to the economy, then there is a bigger cake to be shared, and there will be a bigger slice, not just for older workers, but also for the rest of the economy.
Thank you. Sang-Hyop, I know that you
Well, actually, this is one of the most difficult questions. In some countries, the fertility is so low, like in Japan and Korea. The government actually encourages increasing fertility. And young people say, well, they cannot find the jobs. Why you want to increase the fertility? They cannot find the jobs, right? So what's the purpose of increasing fertility? Well, what's your answer in this case? How do you respond to that kind of response? Reaction. Actually, Michael Herman may know this question because we actually had a very long discussion about this in 2013 in New York, right? Well, do you know, has anyone answer about this? Yes. So.
Yes, please go ahead.
Actually, I have some answers, but I want to hear more.
Yeah, actually, this is not that actually also easy when you have huge youth unemployment problem. Like even actually, yes, we have looking to the welfare of aging. What about actually the kind of every year 20 million youth is joining to the labor force, and several of the millions of the youth is actually remain unemployed or underemployed in many of those countries. So some countries actually reluctant to increase the retirement age, even though there is a heavy pressure from the pension fund side. Those who are managing pension fund, they wanted to actually raise the retirement age so that they could survive the pension fund mechanism itself. But there is a pressure from the other side. There is a youth unemployment. So the government is actually worried about that. If they don't address the youth unemployment, then it could get into the youth frustration, political instability, and other things. So therefore, it is not that as simple as saying that, okay, you just increase the retirement age. That is okay in a country like in Japan or Korea, Europe, where you have a labor shortage. You can actually, providing flexible retirement age, bringing more women into the labor market, you could actually able to maintain the workforce size. But that is not applicable to the labor abundant countries like, say, India or Bangladesh or Indonesia type of countries where there is a huge amount of actually surplus labor. In the past, actually, many of the countries like India not only have, unemployment, there is a huge underemployment problem. Like there are people who have, I don't know exact number, there are people who have a job, but their remuneration is not sufficient to even cross over the poverty line. So we have the so-called working poor problem very, very severe in many of our countries. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I'll just like to add about, if you look at our employment system right now, many of our system is hierarchical. When it's hierarchical, then you have the seniority and things like that. But in the future, with the changing scenario, probably employment will be rather flat, and then new things can come in, so that you can jump into the issues of looking at retirement, looking at employment issues, and not at a hierarchical level, because right now all our systems are very hierarchical, and it's difficult to bring down somebody and push up people. So, but if the system changes into rather flat or horizontal, then probably there are some ways for us to manipulate this kind of employment issues.
Okay, this is actually a very important question and important issue. But let's take it this way. Suppose you are, suppose you really want to, need to answer this question. Then I would actually say this way. Okay, we are actually thinking about just a fixed pie, right? Fixed pie, some people actually have jobs and some people lose jobs. So the solution for unemployment is to increase the pie. So that's the solution, not just to kick them out, yes, right? Exactly. So it's a demand side problem. So we actually have to find a solution from the demand side problem, from the demand side, not from the supply side. So that's why we actually have this kind of thing, the pie is fixed. That's why growth is important. Growth and equity are actually both important, not just the...
Not jobless growth, but have
right.
growth with
so
jobs.
That's actually very important policy.
Can I go to Eduardo? Just because, tell me whether I'm putting you on the spot and asking you, what did you take away from this conference? You're getting a microphone right now.
I take away a lot of loss of sleep.
Yes.
But two points I have. One is, we in relation to the national transfers account, which is, I think, extremely valuable way of presenting the determinants of income, intergenerational transfers, and so on. But there is one thing that is growing in Asia in particular, which is inequalities. But inequalities are also due to the transmission, intergenerational transmission of wealth. And I think Piketty has done quite a bit of work on that. So how can we address issues like this growing inequality due to the transmission of wealth, and not necessarily to the savings of labor income, the wealth acquired in your own working life? So just some reflections about that. The second point I have is we tend to focus and throw the responsibility of adapting, redesigning this society to aging society, mainly on public policies. But I think there is a huge component of community responsibilities. There is a huge component of self-care, adaptation of behavioral changes to the demands of living longer. Yeah? So tomorrow, for example, you will go to visit some communities here in Vietnam, those who go to the field visits. And this is an excellent example of how communities can be adapting to this situation where you have a huge proportion, 40–50% of the population in those communities over the age of 60, and how they are garnering the power and the capacity of them. Now, that has a component also of investment. Each of those organizations that you'll visit tomorrow has an investment in terms of time, has been calculated, is about $10,000 equivalent, to make them durable, sustainable, and to benefit the well-being of those people in those communities. No? So some people say, oh, it's very costly. But no, it's the logic of an investment that brings huge returns. And I won't tell you what the returns are. You will probably see them tomorrow, no? So I just wanted to say those components. This redesign of societies to adapt to aging societies has multiple components, multiple determinants, no? There are things that are looming and threatening this whole search for a equitable society. One of them is this issue of the growing concentration of wealth. That's just a comment, maybe a question.
All right. Michael, did you want Herman? Yes, I know that you were asking certain questions. I wonder if they were answered about the way we look at costs and investment.
Well, yeah, since you're putting me on the spot, I didn't really want to say much, but I think it's important in this entire discussion to indeed look at a demand side for labor and so to some extent, how do we increase the pie? That kind of a question. And that, of course, is also linked to the relationship between saving, consumption, and investment and how we see it. And our recommendations about pension systems themselves will affect these relationships. Yeah? So I think that's very important to look at as one element. It's a very macro perspective. I would say another important aspect is really, the more I think about it, is in many countries, despite aging, you don't have a labor shortage as such. You have a skills shortage in many countries, but the two things are slightly different, and they require different policy responses. Also, in many countries that you look at, labor productivity is growing actually rapidly enough to compensate for people leaving the labor force. Yeah? So the purely economic arguments for let's make sure we get all the older people engaged in the labor force, they're not given everywhere. Of course, there are countries where the situation is different. Maybe you have more of a labor shortage. Portugal has a very low productivity growth. For example, they have an aging population. You might think, okay, they should engage people more in the labor force, but they also have high unemployment, by the way. Yeah? So I think they are very complicated cases. But in addition to these economic arguments, we have to look at aging from a rights perspective. Yeah? People live longer, 10 years longer than previously. It's a huge present to people. It's a huge present to societies. We have to make productive use of that. Yeah? And why would we want to institute any retirement age, regardless of the macroeconomic situation, and tell people they have to retire? We don't want their contribution. I almost feel we can't do that. People, if they want to work, they should be able to work. They should have an opportunity to contribute. Yeah? So in a way, maybe retirement age you can do away with in many countries. It's not the same as saying we should not have a pension age. Yeah, these are two different things. So I think this is one thing. We have to look at the macro sides. I think there's a lot of rights issues in addition to economic issues. And of course, we've discussed it. Investing in human capital throughout the life course, education, health, super important. In my view, we also have to think about labor market institutions beyond pension systems, if you like. Imagine, right now we are accumulating capital through life course. We finish university, then we pay off our student loans, then we start saving, and at some point we dissave. We pay into a retirement fund, and then we dissave. In the future, when we have many different careers, when we live longer, we might want to take breaks, we might want to pursue an education, we might want to take care of family in the middle of our careers. How do we finance that? We have to rethink social systems, insurance systems, capital accumulation through the life course, and how do we make this more flexible in the future? Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. You haven't disappointed us at all. Great, I put you on the spot. Yes, gentleman in the corner. Then I'll come to you.
Yes, thank you. To follow up on Michael's point there, I think there's something to be said about approaching the youth in terms of retirement and in terms of aging. Because often we don't include what we're asking them to do and to support, and we're only concerned with the momentary crisis that we perceive. For instance, we're often asking them to be involved in entrepreneurial activities that are not being taxed properly, for instance, Uber and the sharing economy. Now, currently, I know in the region that sharing economy hasn't grown very much, but I think this is bound to change quite dramatically, and these companies don't have withholding taxes. Another issue we have is the portability of pensions across the region. And I think that's something that we need to sort of explain to the younger generations, that they're being asked to shoulder a burden without the eligibility and the benefits that previous generations were afforded. And I think involving the youth is not just a nice issue or heartwarming issue. I think it's something that's a necessity to have policies that really have a broad range of support. And I just think that's only come up very scantily in the conversations. And I think it's a very critical issue. And it was discussed at the Asian Development Bank Social Protection Week a few weeks ago. And I think it should be brought up again in the context of what we are dealing with. Because it's the future generations that we're designing these policies for. and they will be the ones to be asked to deal with what is decided in the next coming decades.
Thank you. Wendy?
Thank you. I've found the conference quite wonderful. I wanted to make a point about how it's easy, I think, for us, because we all know about the changed age structure of the population. But I think that there are many people in important positions, in government positions, in other relevant positions, in development work, in UN agencies, who really aren't even aware of the demographic transition. They don't know what it is. They don't know that the age structure of the population is changing. All sorts of educated people from Sri Lanka, where I live, and other countries, when I talk to them about what I do, they have no idea that the population is aging. And it seems hard for us to understand that, but I think it's really important for us to recognize it's one of the reasons for slow development of policy, and not just development of policy, but implementation of policy. In Sri Lanka, there are many, and have been for a long time, champions of healthy and active aging in social sciences, even in industry. I know businessmen who've been promoting it. Tilak de Soysa, the HelpAge International previous chairman, is a businessman. In all sorts of fields of endeavor, there are champions of healthy age. But there are many more who simply don't know about it. So we need to think about, at that elementary level, how we raise an awareness. The change in the age structure of the population is not just that there are more old people. There are changes in the proportion of young people. And that's changing over time. And it's our responsibility in our own countries to look at those trends over time. Some of the things we've been talking about just now about youth and older people and the balance of jobs, well, fairly soon that long peak there's been in number of young people is going to decline, but at different stages in different countries. So we mustn't just focus on the older people, but be aware of what the implications of the change in the age structure of the population is. And I think that another problem, Sri Lanka has all these policies and action plans. They have not been implemented, and it is for want of coordination at a high level, because it's to do with the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Social Services. But it's to do with both. And so each one can think the other's doing it. So you need senior level coordination for many of these issues to be addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes to go to the close of the session. I'd like to, one final question before I come back to the panelists for their wrap-up. Yes, if you'd keep it short, please, before I come back.
Very short. Let me put an allegation here to whole country that diversity visa in US migrating my poor people from my country, which I invest million rupees to produce a doctor, engineer. The Middle East taking all human resources for their labor force. Australia diversity visa is pushing all the youth people down there in the country. And we are waiting all older people to come back to dump into my country tomorrow. So all this grand design is creating a bigger crisis that all youth we invest go out. When they get old, they come back to the country. How to resolve?
Point taken. Migration is sometimes positive, but it needs to be managed. Yes. Message taken. So, with your permission, it's been a very stimulating discussion. I'm not too sure we've raised more questions than answers, but that's the nature of the animal. Ma'am, is it?
Not too much of a data, but we would like to know. We are talking of the aged, and 60 years is the age of older persons. How many of us here are over 60 years of age? If we could get that data or statistics later on, perhaps, that will be good. Thank you.
Sure. Eduardo will take note. Absolutely. So Sang-Hyop, your closing thoughts, please.
Just 1 minute, because this is...
Take 2, 3.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is relevant to actually the Wendy's question. That's my fault. That's my fault. Okay, let me give you an anecdotal evidence. We need a time use survey time use survey to figure out how many hours the elderly spend for child care. And then many countries stopped conducting survey. And I asked why. They say, oh, because researchers do not use it. We conducted survey in 1999, and you never used it. So I felt guilty. So I told them, because there is no data, I couldn't do that. We are blaming each other, right? Right. It's a chicken and the egg problem. But this is very important because there are many countries actually representative. The research has been, improving. There has been a lot of research these days, right? And we actually need some data. So if we actually provide some new survey, and some countries actually stopped it, really, the time user survey, many countries. If we actually put some more resources, then I promise that actually many researchers will use it and give much more policy implications using the data, okay?
What I would like to share is that the way we are in old age is the result of our cumulative advantage or disadvantage in earlier life. So to me, we should also think about the population, the issues of the young population, so that we could provide services and programs so that in future they will be a better agent. And to me, it's not selfish to really think about the whole spectrum and focusing specifically on the needs of the aged, the present aged, because each age cohort differences will really determine what kind of policies and program is needed. Because in the future, it will be different ball game entirely. We in this hall today, we have varied background, and some of us are already well off, some needs help, and these kind of scenarios would encourage us to look at the whole spectrum of life planning. It's not just about aging, but it's individual life planning and opportunities and trajectories that are available for us to choose, so that we are in a better position when we are old to be able to have resources to live. Not much, but we need help. We need health. We need some money. And we need the social participation and social relationship to maintain our quality of life in old age.
John?
You ask how many of us are over 60. I'm 60, but I have a 2-year-old child. So I do a hell of a lot of childcare. And I'd like to know how I fill out your form. I bet it's different than most people. And I'm saying that because I want to emphasize that one of the hallmarks of older age is incredible diversity. And I think if we get stuck on chronological age as the things that's of interest to us, it becomes a problem. It becomes self-defeating. And I'd like to come to Wendy's point about the starting point for getting governments engaged being the demographic transition and the increasing number of older people. And most of you, I'm sure, have the same experience as me. Almost every talk you hear about aging, we start with a map or a figure showing how many more older people there are going to be. I've stopped doing that in my presentations because I started asking myself, is that the right place to start? Do we only take action because there's a lot of older people? I think that's wrong. I think if we come back to the rights argument, older people have rights no matter how many of them there are. And I think a better place to start is the whole question of sustainable development. And that line particularly, for example, in SDG 3, which says at all ages. And if governments are going to take the sustainable development goals seriously, they have to address the need of people at all ages, including older people. And I think that as a starting point, rather than just because there's a lot, because the next question is, well, what's the impact going to be on our economy? It's going to send us broke, it's a tsunami, and it's all about cost saving. I'm starting to question that as a starting point. I mean, look, I'm sure you're doing a good job in raising it, but I think maybe we need to think a little bit differently.
I think we come back to the whole point of, do we need an economic justification for I mean, there are some things which are absolute in themselves, they're desirable. Do we fix economic value on death, on value of life, on violence against women? I mean, I know that there is some reasoning around, so I totally agree with you that there are some basic human rights. And in addition to the SDG on at all ages, there's the whole thread of leaving no one behind. And so that's very much at the center.
And allowing everyone to contribute.
Yes, allowing everyone to contribute, 60 plus, below 60. But I think irrespective of the age of the people represented here, I think if we have an intergenerational group, even people below 60, it's more important, equally important to have them at the table. And I think it's very important to hear the voices of older persons too. So having said that, I think we've come to the end of this very stimulating discussion. I don't know whether we've met the expectations of the organizers. I can see a very stern look from Eduardo. But we've done our best, and we have heard but there are many aspects we have not covered. I would have loved to hear Kim. I know we attended his session. There are a number of kind of smaller niche areas which are very, very important. But I'm sure we'll reflect them in the report. But it's my very, very pleasant duty to ask for a round of applause for our wonderful panelists and all of you.